to EST, which is great.
Okay. And then what do I need to go over here now?
Um,
Go over to YouTube and
yeah, are we on YouTube?
how would I know? How would I know? If I go into your channel?
Where did we hook it up to? Where are we going?
There we are. Oh, there you are. So it says you're up on StreamYard.
I don't want that. Yun.
You are live. You on YouTube.
Mhm.
Maybe that's where you'll get your link. There it is. Okay, there's your link. Boom.
So many of them just do this.
And we would help my cast to trap because it's like fairly by, but there's a lot of like all the boys who are talking about their nuts all the time. Very nuts a lot. Yeah, and my kids will like either make this kind of that. It's just normal. It's just
All right.
Get my hair off.
Are you done?
I'm great. I've got it all here. I love you. Quick legs. You're the best.
Can we hold the
Yeah,
checks?
I'll hold them right in my pocket, okay? Ready? Woo! Hi, Lizzie.
Thank you for coming, my friends. Thank you for everyone who's watching from home. It's True Story Night. We have we really do have an amazing night. I'm very, very proud of what you're about to hear. And hi, welcome. I forget what I was about to say. Okay, so here's what happens for True Story. We came up with this idea years ago where when you use the phrase true story, you're about to tell the truth and also embellish upon it. And we've been doing this since May of 2015. And we have accrued a wonderful community of writers. Many are working on long-term pieces, so you'll hear them come several times. They're developing out their own body of work, and others who are reading for the first time. I'll tell you more about that later. Tonight, our theme is family dinner. And we didn't have dinner in my house, we had supper. Dinner was only on special occasions and holidays, but supper was everywhere. When my brothers and I were kids, my mom made every effort to have a traditional home-cooked meal on the table every night at 6 o'clock. And as time passed, and she was worn down by 4 kids, a cheating husband, a divorce, and then going back to the workforce, supper eventually became less than traditional and included a bucket of chicken at least once a week. And here, I confess, love that bucket. I don't eat it anymore because I know how terrible it really is for you, but I love it, and I am mystified by it. How can a meal so complex be so consistent for generations? And I know they say it's made of 11 herbs and spices, but I have a working theory that it's really just like 2 herbs and 9 kinds of salt. Because on a rare occasion that I eat even just one piece, I am left thirsty for about 3 days. I know how bad it makes me feel after eating it, but if it's in front of us, I will hurt your feelings to get a piece of it. True story. Years back, Jenny O'Hara and Nick Ellett were running late to our ESTLA company holiday party, and they had forgotten that they had signed up to bring a dish. So at the last minute, they picked up a bucket of chicken. They arrived with it, and it was gone in seconds. The next year, they brought 2 buckets, and it was the first thing to go. It's now an ESTLA tradition, but you need to get there really early to the party to get a piece. So I know I'm not alone in my love of that bucket of chicken. There's a whole ensemble of us who look forward to it every year around the holidays. But what is it that's so addictive about it? Like I said, it's really not good. It's just consistent and familiar. And hearing our writers working on their pieces for tonight, those were the threads that kept wafting through the expectation of things that are familiar and the shared experience around the table. Family dinner can be so many things. It can be good, and it can be tragically bad. But we still await it with hope of family bonding, even though our families grow and change on the face of things, become really a new family entirely. But that chicken never changes. I'm thirsty just thinking about it. Our first writer tonight is joining us for the very first time, although she has been part of our ESTLA family for many, many years now. And she's even writing her own story for the first time. I have been waiting for the day when Priscilla would say yes to doing True Story, because I know how wonderful a storyteller she can be. So let's please welcome to True Story family, Priscilla Miranda.
I hate cooking. Out of all the qualities my mother gave me that I'm currently trying to undo in therapy, my lack of culinary skills is the only thing I can't seem to fix. As a kid, most of my family dinners with my parents revolved around the dollar menu at McDonald's, which my brothers and I didn't mind, except for the fact that we weren't allowed to order a combo. We got our own burger, and that was about it. There was one pile of fries in the center, next to 1 cup of soda, with 5 straws. How I was supposed to keep track of my own straw was beyond me, but I'm convinced that because of this, I now refuse to share my food with others. At the time, I thought all their weird habits meant that my parents were struggling financially. They weren't. They were just cheaper than dirt. Between lying about my age, wherever kids ate free, and my dad stuffing sugar packets in my mom's purse, family dinners became a game of rules that involved making sure you got a minimum of 3 plates at the buffet. Luckily, those wild dinners didn't happen often because I grew up at my grandparents' house. My mama always had dinner waiting for us, and she made everything from scratch. She made enchiladas with her own sauce, never the stuff on the pan. And she made tamales all year round, not just during the holidays. Every single year, without missing a beat, she would dramatically announce that it was her final year of making tamales, that she was getting too old, and someone else would have to make them from now on. And every year, she would taste other people's tamales and decide she wasn't ready to retire. Even when she wasn't cooking, she was still cooking. She'd be in her room watching her Spanish soap operas on full blast while her pot of beans spilled water into the pot. When she finally came out to check on them, she'd yell at us for turning down the food. She used to say to me, "Mija, don't cook or clean, because once you're married, that's all you ever do." Looking back on it now, I wonder if she regretted saying that when she saw me hit my 30s without so much as a pen. But sometimes I feel like that's why I had no interest in learning how to cook. Society placed this enormous pressure on women to only feel a sense of worth based on their kitchen skills. But I looked at my mom as permission to just be myself. Because if she found a husband without knowing how to boil an egg, so fine. That's taking me a little originally planned, but I know it's not because I can't cook. I have plenty of other issues that prevent me from finding but that's another true story. My nana is the reason I can't sit down in a Mexican restaurant and just enjoy myself. She hated Mexican restaurants. All she did was complain and compare everything to how she made it, and now I do that. And don't get me started on going to Korean barbecue for the first time. I'm sorry, I have to do what? Don't get me wrong, I wanted to learn how to cook for my mom. I was just scared of her. The woman didn't measure anything, which I found barbaric. One day, I was determined to learn how to make flour tortillas. I recorded a video as she added ingredients until our ancestors told her to stop. And I wrote down steps like half a palm of butter and 2 fingertips of salt. I jumped in when it was time to roll out the dough with what felt like a 20-pound roll. Her shapes were perfect circles, and she flipped them over the fire with her bare hands. My shapes looked like drunk frisbees, and once I could put them onto the stove to cook, I used tongs to flip them when she wasn't. Don't worry, she said, as I compared my hot mess to her perfect stack. You just need practice. I've been doing this since I was 9. As you can imagine, growing up with old people meant that we did things a little different. Bedtime was 7 o'clock. Dinner was at 4 o'clock. Most of the time, I would just skip lunch at school, knowing that as soon as I got home, I would immediately be living the dream. Eating sopas or watching Total Request Live. Occasionally, she would mix it up and throw spaghettis or cheeseburgers in the rotation, but I don't think she saw those as much of a challenge. My nana wasn't always able to cook for us, but when she couldn't, my papa, my grandpa, stepped in. He wasn't very versatile in the kitchen, but he did his best. His special was a toasted bologna sandwich with lettuce and mayo cut into triangles. I wasn't a huge fan, but I ate it because he made it for me, and I was mostly looking forward to dessert on those nights. Dessert was a bowl of the most sugar-filled cereals you can cook. My nana and papa were nothing like my parents, who only bought us the boring stuff that was on sale, like Cheerios and Raisin Bran. No, my grandparents spoiled us with a plethora of euphoric options, like Fruity Pebbles, Cocoa Puffs, and Cinnamon Toast Crunch. To this day, because of my papa, I still consider a cold bowl of cereal essential. Growing up, my friends would always comment on how lucky I was to be eating that good. And while I didn't understand it at the time, I now think about it every day. My parents probably never realized that by raising us in our grandparents' house, they were giving us the kind of childhood that some people wanted to. As the years went by, so did our living situation. My parents eventually bought their own house, but we stayed with us. My brother's now wife moved in with us sometime in our 20s, and while we didn't get along too well at first, I realized very quickly one of her most important traits: the girl could cook. When my mama did eventually stop cooking, my sister-in-law took over and made the kitchen her own. She would Google something, skim through the ingredients, and then make it without so much as a glance at the directions. At this point, I still didn't get how anyone's love language can be cooking for other people. But all I knew was I was continuing to get home. Eventually, my brother and his wife had kids of their own, and every night we'd sit, eat together, and talk about our day. My niece would be refusing to eat broccoli unless her mom referred to it as candy, and my nephew would be harshly rating his mom's dinner on a scale from 1 to 10 as if he was a Michelin star chef. Even when I would work late, there was always a plate in the microwave waiting for me. I would watch my sister-in-law drop off my nephew at school, go back home to take care of my niece all day, pick up my nephew from school, do homework with him, and still somehow manage to make dinner for her. I don't have the energy to wash my face before bed, and I don't even have a plant that I take care of. Thinking about it now, I imagine she has the energy for the same reason my nana had the energy to cook for us. Because there are kids in the house who look forward to it every night. My grandparents aren't around anymore, and in some ways, I never truly felt like an adult until they were gone. We finally decided to sell the house, and our last day there is later this year. My brother and his family moved out already, but I decided to stay a little longer. I'll soon be living in my own place for the first time in my life, and the truth is, I'm terrified. I'm gonna starve. Sure, I'll get to display all my Rick and Morty collectibles in the living room, be as loud as I want, and I won't ever have to fight over the washing machine with anyone ever again. But that's what I'm afraid of, the silence. No more of my nephew screaming bloody murder during bath time because his dad got shampoo in his eyes. No more of my niece knocking on my door every time she wants to show me her sweet new dance moves. I'm gonna miss everything about everyone being in the same house as me.
No.
I'm not sure what my family dinners are gonna look like moving forward, but I know they're about to change. Yes, of course, I know I can learn how to cook more than just boxed mac and cheese, but the food is only half of what makes a family dinner. During the past couple weeks of being alone, my dinners have varied from flaming hot Cheetos to cookie dough. Occasionally, I treat myself to McDonald's, but now I get my own fries.
Hello, everyone.
Hutch?
Good to be in space with live people. I turned my phone off this time. I don't know if you remember, but last time my phone, anyone who was here,
I
just
remember.
started talking. Remember? Just like I said, "Hey, Bixby." I don't know what it thought I said. It just started going directions too. I went, "Oh shit." So my phone is literally off. Year after year, Sebastian's school had its holiday fundraiser at the Studio City Barnes & Noble, where a percentage of that night's proceeds went to the school. Michael and I saw this as an opportunity to carry out our super secret Santa shopping stratagem. I distracted the kids, while Michael, out of their eye line, snuck up to the cashier and purchased way too many books that at a later date Maxie would devour voraciously, while Sebastian would leave undisturbed on his shelf. Then, unseen by little eyes, my husband stowed the books in the trunk of the car, our children once again totally oblivious of our Xmas escapades. After doing this for a couple of years, the school provided another money-spending opportunity hidden in the guise of holiday savings. The families were encouraged to cross the street to a trendy make-your-own pizza joint where a discounted school rate was offered. My little family conferred and decided to give it a go. On the wall of the Cafeteria Chic Pizzeria was a glossy poster of their specialty seasonal pizza: prosciutto, fig, balsamic, and arugula. The food stylist did an exquisite job. Under a plush bed of dewy arugula, the prosciutto was just beginning to crisp as mozzarella dripped seductively. Without a second thought, that's what I wanted. My family had already ordered and went in search of a table. As I approached the jittery lass topping the pizzas, she reached into the prosciutto bin and found only 3 meager pieces. She looked around, terrified. "There's no more prosciutto in the prosciutto bin," she whimpered. I wasn't sure if her reaction was commensurate with her dilemma. Was she afraid of slowing down the line? Was she not qualified to refill the prosciutto bin? Maybe there was a prosciutto keeper, and if she were to disturb his fabulosity, something horrifically bad would happen that would end the Yuletide season as we know it. I just wasn't sure. Her doe eyes pleaded with me, "Are you sure you don't want something else?" But unbeknownst to her, I had begun a secret mantra: prosciutto, fig, balsamic, arugula. Prosciutto, fig, balsamic, arugula. Throwing her angst under the bus, I said the last thing she wanted to hear: "I'll wait." Something you should know about me: I ordered food exceptionally well. I'm the guy who gets sweetbreads this or calf brains that. My restaurant mates get duly grossed out, and yet when my sumptuous supper arrives, jaws drop with envy every single time. So, when I shop prosciutto, fig, balsamic, arugula on a pizza, I had found my new gastronomic Valhalla. Another pizza worker came along, not the prosciutto keeper as I had hoped, but someone with more notches on his belt than doe eyes. Notches, for that is what we shall call him, had an appealing can-do attitude. He told doe eyes to put the paltry portion of prosciutto on the pallid pizza, indicating to me not to worry, more would be on its way. Dough Eyes ripped the 3 measly pieces into 6 measlier pieces and scattered the cured meat. The speck of speck spectacularly sparse. Then they stood there, Dough Eyes and Notches just stood as if nothing else could happen until the more prosciutto arrived. The assembly line stopped. The can-do attitude vanished. No one went to look for the prosciutto keeper. They didn't put my order to the side and work on the next person's pizza. The line got longer. Customers behind me were beginning to grumble. We were at a standstill because the prosciutto bin was empty and the person at the centre of this catastrophe, c'est moi. I decided this Fado farce needed to play out with me, without me as an audience, so I went to where my family was seated and watched them eat their artisanal pizzas, which had already been hand-constructed and oven-baked with care. It may sound silly, but in that moment, my heart was full. I was called over to the counter where my pizza had been constructed but not yet baked, and was met by a petite man who seemed to embody the combined worst traits of a chill chihuahua, a mincing Ebenezer Scrooge, and a jar of mayonnaise just gone bad. He unctuously uttered, "You'll have to pay $2 additional for the extra prosciutto, sir." Aha! This evil gnome must be the prosciutto keeper. I quickly assessed the sitch. My family was halfway done with their meals, but my uncooked pizza was definitely devoid of porcine protein. I thought your employee said that more prosciutto was needed because this, I said, indicating the 6 scraps of picayune pink on a sea of moots, was not enough. The prosciutto keeper glanced quickly at Dough Eyes and Notches, seeking to ascribe blame. Both of their faces went slack, and I became keenly aware if I continued to frame my argument on their mistake, they would become the unfortunate recipients of the prosciutto keeper's luxurious wrath. A skirmish had begun. I lunged with faux cheery kindness. The prosciutto keeper parried with dismissive smarm. I tried to appeal to his better nature, not completely sure he really had one. He wore me down with cost-basis analyses and annual projections. I offered the homily. The customer is always right. He droned on and on and on and on and on as to why the piddling pieces of fatty flesh on my pasteurized repast were indeed the allotted amount per pizza, per customer, per visit, unless one was prepared to pay extra, which, just please, stop talking. Crap. I lost my cool. A victorious glisten of spittle gleamed on the prosciutto keeper's lower lip. I looked into his parasitic eyes and said, I just want my pizza to look like the poster without paying extra. I turned before he could say anything else and walked back to the table, cursing that the prosciutto keeper won that round. Prosciutto, fig, balsamic, arugula, prosciutto, fig, balsamic. The mantra wasn't working. As I impatiently waited, I scanned the restaurant. All the other diners were enjoying themselves, having fun with their toppling toppings. As much as I wanted their joy to be infectious, I found myself the only person in the establishment stuck in the land of bah humbug. My name was called. I went up to the counter, and a young man in dire need of Proactiv was holding a tray which contained my freshly baked pizza. You know when a rotund, undeniably pale white person, male or female, your choice, takes off his or her clothes and you misguidedly catch a glorious glimpse of an overly large and pasty butt? My pizza looked exactly like a lumpishly pasty butt, drizzled with balsamic. The counter person, who we'll call Pimple, noticed my disdain. A light bulb went on, and he quickly reached behind the counter and handed me a minuscule plastic container full of arugula. You get to add this yourself, Pimple declared. Proud, he remembered all of his words. As his stilted enthusiasm watched over me, I saw that the arugula was wilted, most of it yellow. I had lost my touch. I no longer order food well, for the plate of regurg before me was the polar opposite of sumptuous. Then I had an aha moment, something that could save the entire meal. I looked at Pimple, and with a forced glee that hurt my ears when I heard it, I practically shrieked, "You forgot the figs!" For a moment, I imagined Pimple saying something like, "My bad," then reaching behind the counter, pulling out yet another plastic container, this one filled with magical figs that will tickle my taste buds and make me believe in Santa Claus once again. Instead, Pimple twisted up his face in a way that reminded me of politically correct Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's. "It's not fig," he clarified. "It's fig balsamic." I quickly referenced the glossy poster and saw my mistake. What I originally thought was prosciutto, fig, balsamic, ampersand, arugula was, in actual fact, prosciutto, fig, balsamic, no, ampersand, arugula. Pimple leaned over the counter conspiratorially and whispered, "The poster is a bit misleading." I took the tray back to the table and pulled off the plastic lid to the Lilliputian allocation of jaundiced arugula. I wanted to cry. I took in my family. My son, the pickiest eater on the planet, was devouring his personal pepperoni with purpose. My husband jubilantly went at his Mediterranean masterpiece, capers, artichoke hearts, olives, and meat. Lots and lots of meat. So overloaded pieces fell off his slice every time he took a bite. And my daughter, well, she was busy playing with her new elf on a shelf that Michael just purchased at Barnes & Noble, but all of them were succumbing to the merriment and awe that defines the holiday season, and yet completely unmindful of my personal torment. Another artichoke heart slipped from Michael's pizza and fell with a flump to the plate. And that carelessness, that abandonment was the final straw. I leaned across the table towards my husband and with choked back urgency whispered, "If I wanted to leave right now, would you just do it?" With his mouth full of pizza, he froze. He had no idea where I was coming from, and it was evident an inner debate had started. On one hand, he and the kids were thoroughly caught up in the exhilaration of the moment. On the other, well, there was my sourpuss prophesying some sort of illogical doom. He began to put down his pizza, and I could see by his expression, not that he would blindly acquiesce and leave, but that he would at least consider my request. That was enough. "Never mind," I course corrected. "I can get through this." "Is anything wrong, sir?" The halitosis-laden snarl made me look up, and there was the put-upon prosciutto keeper in his natural habitat. I imagined he felt my energy was bringing down the vibe, so he deigned to come over to our table. The tone in his voice made me feel as if everything was my fault. I wanted to yell, "Can you not see how this is unfair? Look at the picture on the wall, and then look at what I have been served. Can you not see that they are totally different species?" Instead, I concealed my frustration, and with a pretty as you please smile, inquired, "Would it be too much to ask for a fresh container of arugula? Mine seems to be yellow." At this moment, I witnessed a holiday miracle. The prosciutto keeper shapeshifted into the arugula harvester. By the way his hackles went up, it was obvious he wanted to fight the point. But then he must have done some blah calculation and figured out to get rid of me quickly and efficiently, it will only cost him a diminutive dram of fresh arugula. Coming right up, sir. That's right. He saw my fuck you and raised me a go fuck yourself. The arugula harvester brought the new container and placed it in front of me. verdant green leaves discernible through the plastic lid. Before he slithered away, his mask slipped and he hissed, "Just because it's yellow doesn't mean it's not fresh." Oh, I believe I won that round. I sprinkled the smattering of arugula, hoping it would change the pizza's appearance, change my perception. It did not. I wanted to write letters. I wanted to leave a scathing Yelp review. I wanted to build a pipe bomb and blow the place to smithereens. But I did none of those things because that pasty butt pizza was damn good.
Troy Brockton has not been up here on his own stage in a long time. He's been running the place. And I have to tell you, I'm so happy that you get to hear Troy's voice tonight. And I'm happy that you're joining us again. Thank you.
Everybody. Is that the turn? No, I mean, I don't think so. What about there? I can't see. My partner, Luke, and I hissed back and forth at each other as we drove down an impossibly dark and unfathomably rocky back road in Arkansas. At least you're not in the Fiesta, we managed to sheepishly utter. The day before, my dad had called and said, "Hey, I think you should get an SUV instead of that small sedan for the trip." "Why?" I asked him to reply. "Is it that bad?" "Well," my dad sighed, "I just think you'd be better off." Thanks to the multitudes of stones and loose rocks, the past 1.5 miles had taken us 20 minutes to cross. We were driving through this seemingly uninhabited wilderness to get to a cabin my parents had rented for a family getaway. Unfortunately, this family vacation was going to be a little light on the family. My oldest sister and her kids weren't able to make it out, and neither was my brother, for reasons he never seemed to make clear. Regardless, this left only me and my sister Julie available for this Arkansas extravaganza. Well, us, and because on top of everything, this was also the trip where I was going to introduce Luke in person to my parents. Talk about serendipity. My family up to that point had never been very accepting of my queerness. It was just the year before that I had worked up the courage to tell my mom that I was dating Luke, and only then because we've been dating for almost 2 years. But I desperately wanted them to know him and to learn about our lives. We were talking about the trip earlier this spring, and Luke let me know they'd be open to going on vacation, as long as my parents were okay. Now, I knew this would be crossing a boundary that I'd never been to before, but I kept feeling more and more called to live truthfully, not hide half of my life from the two people who loved me most. So I did gather the nerve to ask, and to my parents' credit, after only discussing it for a couple of days, they said they'd be happy to have us both. I was ecstatic, Luke was thrilled, and I felt I could relax my shoulders for the first time in years. Back to the car. We're still hurtling down this mountain road in slow-mo, relentlessly scanning the tree line for small signs that tells us we've arrived. Luke is refreshing his phone, trying in vain to get a decent signal, while also reading out the written instructions I've scrawled on a piece of paper. Thankfully, after much too long, we found the steep path rising up to the cabin, and shakily made our way into the grassy parking spot. I looked to Luke, nodded, he grabbed my hand, we breathed. And then we hop out. My family is quick to come through the door and greet us. I'm so nervous, I know my smile probably looks like it's hanging on my face via thumbtacks and scotch tape, but my parents give me their usual hugs and kisses. They're a bit wooden, but not too flustered when they shake Luke's hand and say their first words. We sit in the living room after hauling in the luggage and make small talk, but inside, I'm hurting. It's much too late for any real discussion, but my parents must really be trying to accommodate because they don't make us feel like we're imposing on their bedtime. Eventually, I do cut the night short, and we usher ourselves up to the bedroom. I ask Luke what he thinks so far, like he could somehow have an accurate gauge of the situation after 15 minutes of FaceTime. But he assures me things are going great. In my head, I agree, but the gurgling in my bowels won't let me fully ascend. The next morning, we wake up to a scattering of biscuits. I guzzle down my first cup of coffee and join everyone on the porch. Now, this place may have been out in the middle of nowhere and almost impossible to get to, but the wraparound porch facing the mountain valley made up for most of it. We were treated to gorgeous views of the treetops, emerald green that stretched to the horizon. That was the backdrop to our breakfast, social bumbling and get-to-know-yous. Julie was my safety net, since she was the only other person in the cabin who had spent time with before. But unfortunately, she was no help here due to her inability to wake up before 11 a.m. Despite that, everything appeared fine. When we got too deep into the Southeast Texas weeds, Luke would come in with a question to pull us out and involve him in the conversation. There were some halts and starts and stops, but all things considered, we made it through unscathed. The one thing I noticed, however, was my parents' major deference to any plans that Luke and I might have. We asked if they had any big ideas for the day, and they said, no, nothing too special. Y'all can go explore if you want. Really, I thought. Normally our vacations aren't too scripted, but this seemed even more loosey-goosey than usual. We're just going to head down to the river later, that's all, they tacked on, giving us a guidepost, but not much else. Since driving out into town required half an hour each way, and I was already paranoid about scratching our little car, we ended up walking around the little dirt roads that sprawled through the gorge. This place was really remote, and walking around the dried up riverbeds only added to the sense of isolation. There were no people around, only the ever-present drone of cicadas. Now, somewhere down the line, we passed by a one-room shack set on the side of the road that acted as a community center. Mail for the whole area was stacked by its front door, dropped off by what I can only assume to be the last surviving member of the Pony Express. The heat and humidity soon drove us back indoors, cutting short our expedition. Although, in fairness, we had begun to see many more no trespassing keep out signs. So any illusion that we were in some vast and untrodden forest began to wear thin. It turns out there were inhabitants here, just not the type who wanted company. Life back at the cabin was placid. Almost everyone was taking a siesta. The house felt empty, even though all 5 of us were there, all of us holed up in our individual rooms. Togetherness still seemed tenuous. As the sun dipped, it came time for us to all go down to the riverbank and play. The car ride seemed like a great way to continue breaking the ice. There's nothing like a captive audience, you know? But Dad's preference for slightly too loud country music and the continuous din of tire crunching over rock prevented us from talking much. And when we finally made it to the river, quarantine seemed to happen again. Dad kept insisting we find the nearby trail and see where it goes. So they found a spot near the water while Luke and I paired off into the woods again. At this point, I couldn't help but start overthinking. Were they trying to shoo us away intentionally? Do they think it's awkward when we're around? Then again, I did mention to Mom how much we've gotten into hiking, and I did point out some trails we could do during the trip. Maybe they were just trying to be supportive, show us that they care about our interests too. Either way, we all ended up taking a dip in the river by the end of the evening. But just as I couldn't stop wondering what imaginary creatures were brushing up against my leg under the water, I couldn't help but pay attention to the static of anxiety in the back of my brain. On the way home, I was still tying myself in knots. I was on high alert, continuously judging our interactions, giving marks for a well-told anecdote here, taking away points for a dropped subject or awkward segue here. Instead of enjoying myself, I was forced to internally score every second we were together, scared that if we dropped below a certain threshold, then my family would never accept Luke and I'd ruin our chances for harmony. I didn't know if it was the jet lag or the severe emotional turmoil that I was in. We got back and Dad began to cook dinner while the rest of us showered and cleaned off. I took the opportunity to try and collect myself. I stood in the shower and attempted to beat back all of my negative thoughts, the what ifs, the what coulds, and the infinite bad possibilities. And despite all evidence to the contrary, I just couldn't shake the feeling that this was all a charade, that the agreeable exteriors my parents were putting up were facades, ready to come tumbling down the moment any of this became too real. Perhaps I had spent too much time writing plays about unhappy families because I couldn't imagine mine being any different. Still reeling, I stumble out of the shower and put on some night clothes. My large intestine still feels like it's in a vice grip, so the last thing I want to do is eat. But as I step out from the guest bedroom and onto the loft's landing, I'm greeted with familiar smells and sounds. I look down and Mom's busy chopping onions and peppers, but she's also asking Luke to stir the chili con queso that's on the stove, gently directing the flow of the kitchen. Julie is streaming in and out of the porch's double doors, preparing the table. Dad's barking out requests for knives and plates from the unseen barbecue around the corner. And out of nowhere, it starts to feel like every other dinner we've ever shared. I understand these rhythms, and Luke seems to slide right in. "This is so good," he exclaims as he dips another chip into the molten cheese. Just wait until the main event, Thad yells back. We sit atop a court, and the dark cloud that's been following me starts to dissipate. Anxious smirks are overridden by smiles, and pleasantries replaced with laughs. A sizzling plate of fajitas quickly graces the table, and it soon becomes apparent there won't be many leftovers. Luke and my dad get into a spirited conversation about the quality of meat, leading my father to launch into a minutes-long panegyric on the Texan supermarket HEB. Homer would have wept. But the piece de resistance happens when sometime during the conversation, something is said that triggers a particularly happy memory of my parents. Their faces light up with toddler-like glee, and they slyly utter the phrase everyone fears when introducing the partner to the family. Did he ever tell you about the time? Curtains rise, cue the mortifying chocolate story. And it's at that moment that I'm most at peace. Because how could I be? It's just another family dinner.
My friend Freddie was a dreamer, a staunch believer in himself, a mad talker who knew how to tell a good story. He was funny, lip smart, entertaining, one of the few people I've ever known who spoke in paragraphs. He came to LA several years before I did. He left the East Coast for an art school here, and afterwards stayed on to write screenplays and movie reviews. I arrived in '78, driving a Volkswagen Bug on a tour around the country. At the time, Freddie was back east at a writer's colony for a month, and he offered to let me stay in his apartment in Silver Lake. I arrived on Thanksgiving night in the torrential downpour. He left behind yogurt and granola in his refrigerator with a note to help myself. I still remember how grateful I felt for his thoughtfulness for that Thanksgiving meal. I thought, California, this place is for me. When Freddie returned from the writer's colony, I offered to pay him for the month I'd stayed in his apartment, even though it would have been vacant otherwise. His rent was $150 per month, which was a lot of money at the time. He was a very gracious guy, one of the kindest people I've ever known, so I thought he'd turn it down. I wish I could say I didn't need it, he said, but I do. Thank you. I gave him the $150 and continued on with my tour of the country. 2 years later, I was offered a job in LA and came back out. Freddie and I spent a lot of time together, meeting for dinners, going to film screenings that he was invited to as a reviewer. We were both writers, although I had a government job and was working in short fiction, while he was determined to make his living from writing, mostly screenplays and film reviews. His writing was smart and eloquent, brilliant at times, but financially, he seemed to be struggling. When his father won 2 airline tickets to Ireland in a church raffle, he gave them to Freddie, who invited me to come along. On the flight, somewhere over the Atlantic, he mentioned that he was short of cash. Could I make him a loan for the trip? I said I could spare $300. That would be great. We had an excellent time. In Dublin, we found that we both brought our old copies of The Catcher in the Rye to reread on the trip. We visited the Joyce Tower in Sandymount, bought 2 British editions of Ulysses, and books in hand, enacted the shaving scene on top of the tower. Freddie as stately plump Buck Mulligan, and me as the dark and moody Stephen Devils. Later, we retraced the steps of Leopold Bloom through the streets and pubs of Dublin. At the end of the trip, back in LA, Freddie pointed at me and said, "I know I owe you the $300. I'll get it to you." He'd tell me this every time I saw him. Whenever we got together for dinner or a movie. Money was tight, he said, but he's expecting a payday soon, a screenplay that was sure to sell. Each time I tell him it was fine, and shrug as though I didn't really care. And I didn't. Then one night, when I met him at his apartment, he was excited to show me something in his living room. An artist friend had a gallery showing, and he brought a triptych of her paintings. They were hung on the living room wall, a woman dancer poised to run in the first image, then running in the second, and in full flight in the third. He seemed proud to tell me that he paid $500 for each one. It took me by surprise. In fact, I was struck dumb. He didn't seem to remember that he owed me money. The next time I saw him, a few weeks later, he mentioned the 300 and how he knew he still owed me. I told him to forget it. Were you sure? He said. Yeah, I said, you provided the airline ticket. That was worth at least 300. And we left it at that. Both of us unwilling or unable to discuss it any further. Over time, Freddie had his ups and downs in the film industry and also in publishing. But he met with a steady decline through the 90s. Newspapers and magazines had cut back in size. Freelance assignments were hard to come by. As he held out hope that his next screenplay would be the one to solve his mounting financial problems, I found myself picking up all of our checks at dinner, as well as the movie tickets when he wasn't reviewing. He was grateful, and I was happy to treat simply because I enjoyed the company and I could afford to pay. But at some point, I noticed he stopped even offering me pay. It felt strange that we hadn't discussed it, just slipped into the roles of artist and benefactor. Was I just being a nice guy, a good Catholic boy helping out a friend in need? Or was I failing to speak up for myself, to set boundaries that I'd been more comfortable with? When I joined him a few times for meals with his industry friends, I saw that he did this with them too. They reached for their wallets, he didn't. One night before a screening in Beverly Hills, we met for dinner at Kate Manalini's, which was basically an expensive diner across the street from the theater. After the movie, as we walked back to the car, Freddie patted his belly, which had grown large, and said, "I'm still hungry. I could go for another meal." I had paid for one dinner already, and now I was being invited to pay for another. We went back to Kate Manalini's, where Freddie ordered a full breakfast with a double side of sourdough toast. I wasn't hungry, but ordered a bowl of strawberries. They came with a dish of chocolate sauce that I didn't eat, and when Freddie finished his eggs and sausages, he asked if he could have the chocolate sauce, which he proceeded to spread in heaping in spoonfuls onto the sourdough toast. I felt disturbed, but kept it to myself, thinking, who wants to correct the manners of a friend, especially one who's struggling and is apparently becoming obsessed with food? As much as I loved and respected Freddie and enjoyed his company, I began to avoid meeting him for meals. There was something missing in our connection, something that needed to be addressed, and I didn't know how to broach it. Would it cause him more pain than he was already feeling? Would it ruin something special in our friendship? The feeling that together we were the best versions of ourselves. Over the years, I made loans. I picked up tabs. I bought boxes of his used books. I bought his old bookshelves when he downsized and moved into a friend's apartment. Whatever he asked for, which really wasn't much, I'd pitch in, without question or comment. At one of our last lunches a few years ago, as we stood in line to pay the cashier, Freddie said to me, "One of these days, I'll be the one treating you." I knew he meant it, despite our long history that suggested otherwise. "You're on," I said. But the truth is, I let many months go by without reaching out to him again. Then one day, I was having lunch by myself in a cafe when Freddie's sister Rita called from out of town. She told me that Freddie was at St. John's Hospital in the emergency room. His lip had gone numb while he was eating lunch at home, and he thought he might be having a stroke. Rita, a doctor, said, "This is serious. Someone should be with him." I brought a book thinking I might end up sitting for a while in the waiting room, but I was ushered immediately into the ICU. Freddie was in a hospital gown, stretched out on a bed, being attended to by a nurse. She was checking his mental acuity and physical responses. When the nurse stepped out, Freddie seemed nervous, his speech slightly slurred. He grinned and asked me about the book I was holding, which was Neil Simon's memoir. In the midst of this tense hospital scene, with his life hanging in the balance, Freddie was actually curious about whether or not Neil Simon's brother was discussed in the book and whether they'd had a competitive relationship. One minute we were two writers, brothers in arms, amused at the competition between two famous writers. And the next minute the nurse was standing between us. She told Freddie there was a penumbra on his x-ray, and she needed to take him away for an MRI to figure out whether the shadow indicated that there was bleeding. As it turned out, there was. And within minutes after she brought him back, he was unconscious. 3 days later, he was gone. Months later, I met Rita and her husband at the public storage facility where Freddie's roommate had moved his belongings. They were planning to haul everything away and sort through it at home. In one of the boxes, I saw the 3 paintings of the dancer. I told Rita about the $300 loan and the $1,500 purchase. At this point, almost 40 years after the fact, I found the story kind of funny. But she looked at me seriously and said, "I'm sorry." Then she said, "Would you like to have the paintings?" I never really looked closely at the paintings. I pulled them out of the box and lined them up on the floor against the wall. There she was, the dancer. In running shorts and bare feet. In a starting position in the first image, crouched and ready to run, then off and running in the second, and finally in the third and final image, airborne, full of end. A woman's arms and legs, painted by a woman artist, but taken together as a whole. I saw something else. I saw Freddie's life, his career as a writer, as he would have dreamed it, driven from start to finish, committed with a singular focus, and finally in full, exuberant flight. I turned to Rita. "I'd love to have the paintings." "Well," she said with a laugh, "you paid for them."
I'm sorry, folks, I owe you a program which will be on our website tomorrow. Download, and it has information about this artist.
Robin Blanchard, yeah.
She's still painting.
Yes.
So please visit the site tomorrow. It'll be up in the morning, and we'll celebrate this artist's work as well. Thank you, Paul.
I'm reading a chapter from the book I just completed. So now the hard part starts. It was a humid morning, and I already had an attitude. The night before, Mommy insisted that I help her prepare food for the annual MTA picnic in our overheated kitchen. Late into the evening, we mixed potato salad and fried far too much chicken. It was 1 or 2 in the morning before I was allowed to go to bed. At 11 years old and in full pout, I had begun to figure things out in my mind. Family life wasn't quite as it could be. Television, my only reference, made it clear that the atmosphere inside my home differed from the picturesque and tranquil versions presented in my favorite shows. The Robinsons were lost in space, but managed to enjoy one another's company. Even Leave It to Beaver reruns, a model of sanitized, stilted whiteness, formed a basis of how things could possibly be different if my parents showed any interest at all in my inner life. I felt an unfairness that went beyond the outbursts of violence. It was my growing sense of being put upon, a sense only heightened by my parents' dysfunction. I wanted to rebel, but I had not yet developed a vocabulary of rebellion, And though I began to menstruate that year, making me a bundle of contradictions, I lacked an outlet for my combustion. No one talked to me about my changing body. And you didn't raise your voice to my parents. You simply did what you were told. That night, Lenora was behind schedule and overwhelmed. It seemed as if it was always our responsibility to feed everybody. I noted to myself that this was always her routine. It wasn't just this picnic. Whenever we had company, there had to be 3 main courses: fried chicken, hot roast, and a ham. Just in case a guest didn't like one, they could have the other. I noticed that most people ate all 3. And it always made more work for me. It was now Sunday morning, the day of the annual Metropolitan Transit Authority picnic. One of the only 2 events we participated in as a family. The other was Mother's Day at Cousin Wilhelmina's home in Englewood, New Jersey. Inevitably, I wound up in the kitchen washing all the dishes just so my mother could prove that she was raising her eldest daughter right. Paulette may have helped, but I honestly don't remember her presence. This lapse in memory is more than likely due to the adolescent worldview I held, the one in which I insisted that it was only me being so put upon. Don't ask for seconds. Don't run around in the backyard. Smile and say please and thank you. Those were the rules. Though the event was fraught with landmines, I could at least look forward to the best peach cobbler in the world. Look at Angie, the other guests remarked as I stood over a sink full of suds. Isn't she smart? Lenora beamed as I sulked, longing for more cobbler. The yearly ritual usually concluded with my sisters and me sitting in the back seat of Paul's car while both our parents berated us all the way back to Brooklyn for the countless ways we had embarrassed them. Now, it was the morning of the annual MTA picnic. I hated going with a passion I dare not mention. Preparation started a week in advance. My mother's habit was to buy us brand new summer outfits, shorts, t-shirts, and bright white sneakers. Play clothes we would not be allowed to play in at the picnic. Our hair, washed and pressed the day before, was now adorned in brand new satin ribbons, just like on Easter Sunday, as our job was to look pretty and sit on our picnic blanket, smiling but not moving, while all the other kids ran around having fun. Fun was never the objective. Our job was to be the model children Lenora needed us to be in order to compensate for all the drinking and acting out Paul was planning on doing that day. I was beginning to work this out in my mind. I didn't get all the reasons for their behavior. I just knew day trips with my parents were never any fun. So here I was, cranky and hot, helping my mother overcompensate with mounds of both potato and macaroni salad, coleslaw, fried chicken, pound cake, sweet tea with lemon. I hated the annual MTA picnic. I had an attitude problem. We had last seen my father sometime Friday. The weekend of the annual MTA picnic was such a big deal to Paul, he usually started celebrating early. Having spent the night elsewhere, he traipsed in at 9 or 10 that Sunday morning to check if we were on schedule. This was his day. He'd get to spend the day with his MTA drinking buddies while pretending to be a family man all at the same time. Another thing I was beginning to work out in my pre-adolescent brain. Since Paul had been out all night, Lenora was in her usual bad mood. The day was starting out in typical fashion, and I knew I was destined to have a relationship. There was an unspoken but well-established agreement between Paulette and me. It was to keep quiet and lay low. We never discussed our parents' behavior or the multiple layers of confusion